compile JSP file. We know the underlying code for JSP is Java servlet, right? Yeah. As I said in the previous slide, it is a Java servlet. When you have a Java servlet, you need to compile it, right? Yeah. You need to compile it. Yeah. Here, the server needs to compile it. The server needs to do that compilation. Yeah. So this slide, we want to learn how does the server do the compilation. Yeah. All right. The compilation is done automatically. So you cannot see it. It happens automatically. Okay? And you don't need to send any command. You do not need to do anything. It is done automatically. But there is some detail behind it. So we need to know that kind of detail, compilation detail. That kind of detail, it can help us understand coding logic. So when we learn later a lot of details, the coding logic, you need that kind of background information. All right. First, translation step. Here, let me elaborate that translation step more. It is translated into a servlet file, and the servlet file then gets compiled by the server. All right. So here, that means there is a physical servlet file exists somewhere. Okay? Yeah, because after the translation, you need to put somewhere, right? You need to have some place to store those translated JSP servlet files. Yeah. Here, I can tell you the location. Yeah. Although we do not need to check it, right? We do not need to go there to see it, but there is really some specific location to store it. Here, I just use Tomcat as an example. Tomcat, because different servers will put translated JSP files in different locations. Yeah. Here we only need to use Tomcat as the example. Put all translated compiled JSP in this specific directory. Yeah. So let me explain. Okay. Bracket Tomcat, that refers to your Tomcat installation directory. Tomcat installation directory. Okay. Yeah. Somewhere on your local computer. Okay? Yeah. So you know where it is. Okay? Inside Tomcat, you have a work directory. Okay? Yeah. It's standard location. Yeah. There is a work directory. If you get into the work directory, there is a Catalina directory. Okay? Catalina directory. Okay? Inside that, so here you can see Tomcat is trying to hide those translated files. Okay? There's so many levels try to hide in some way, okay? Sort of, partially hide those files. Okay? Yeah. Because they do not expect people look at those files. Although you can do it if you really want to look at those files. Yeah. After that, local host directory, then your project, your web project, you should have a name, right? You should have a context root, right? Yeah, context root. You have a context root, okay? So then that folder appears under that directory. So if you open that directory, you can find your translated JSP files, okay? Yeah. But here, so this is, here we talk about the standard Tomcat, okay? Standard Tomcat. So what's the standard Tomcat? So you install the Tomcat, so you deploy your web application inside your Tomcat directory. That's the standard Tomcat. Why I mentioned the standard? Because when we use Eclipse, remember? So in this class, we will use Eclipse. Sorry, Yeah. Oh, Eclipse. Yeah. When we use Eclipse, yeah. When we use Eclipse IDE to do our Java projects, then we don't use standard Tomcat. Okay, we use internal version. Inside Eclipse, there is an internal Tomcat support. Internal Tomcat support. Okay, yeah. So that means all those translated files, all those things, Eclipse will use its own storage locations to store. So it's not in your original Tomcat location. So you won't see in your connected Tomcat, because when you have a Tomcat, you need to connect. Yeah, Tomcat. Yeah, yeah. Here, by the way, because here we talk about Eclipse Tomcat. Yeah, I need to post the tutorials. So now you need to get to the programming part. Yeah. After we learn the basic knowledge, right now we need to work on the programs. Yeah. So I need to post my tutorial and teach you how to install Tomcat. All the software. Tomcat. Okay. Yeah. So Tomcat inside Eclipse, there is an internal setting. Yeah. So we don't know that. Yeah, very complicated. We don't need to know that. Okay? So that's why the translated files inside Eclipse, it is very hard to find. Usually, you cannot find them. Yeah. Only in some very special situation, Eclipse, when they print out some error messages, then you can see, oh, based on the error message, oh, I can see the location is there. Otherwise, you won't find it. Okay? All right. All right, so that's the translated location. Here, the details, we don't need to know that kind of details, but we need to know it happens somewhere. Okay? It happens somewhere. Yeah. All right. Next, then, now the compilation step. So now the translation step is done, we get to the compilation step. But when it is compiled, then for different servers, different web containers, okay, different servers, the behaviors are different. Regarding this compilation issue, the behaviors will be different. Here we look at the Tomcat. For the Tomcat, it uses the just-in-time compilation. So what's that? Just in time. Okay? In time. That means when the user, more specifically, when the first user, okay, the first user requests it, then it is compiled. Okay? When the first user requests access this JSP, yeah. So let's use the index.jsp. Okay? Suppose we have this index.jsp, put it in our web application. Yeah. After we put there, okay? Yeah. If we do not access it, yeah. Think about it. If we do not access it, then it won't get compiled. Okay? It stays there. Okay? Yeah. If nobody needs to access it, it never gets compiled. Yeah. Only when someone type, okay, at a URL, type a long string URL, index.jsp, access it the first time. Suppose that is the first time. Okay? Then the server compiles the translated JSP file, yeah. Then run it. Yeah. Based on that, you will see some significant delay. Because that compile, make it work, that whole thing, you can see significant delay. Okay? So when you first time visit a JSP, you always C, sometimes you need to wait 2 or 3 seconds, okay? 2 or 3 seconds, okay? The first time. The second time, very fast. Second time, because it is already compiled. You only need to compile once. The second time, you get a response immediately. The first time, even for a very simple JSP, you still need to sit there. You can feel the delay. Yeah, you can feel that delay. Yeah. So then you may wonder, for beginners, so why I always need to wait 2 or 3 seconds. Yeah. That is the reason. Okay. Yeah. So that's why for real world applications, usually people need to access all their JSP after you develop it, make it work, test it, deploy it. Make sure you access all your JSPs to make them compiled. Yeah, you don't want your customers wait 2 or 3 seconds. Okay, so you want to do it by yourselves. Okay, yeah. For your customers, they can see the results immediately. Yeah. So that's the thing people should do. All right. So that's the compilation step. All right. Next, getting to the translated JSP code. So we want to understand a little more in the translated JSP code. Although we do not need to get into too much detail, but we need to know the structure. Here, we just want to know the structure, because that background information is very helpful for us to understand all the later technical details. Otherwise, you feel, why the behavior is like this? It's hard to understand why the behavior so complicated like this. Yeah. The reason, the background is here. Yeah. All right, so let's look at the structure. Yeah. In the translated JSP servlet file, there is a special method called this underscore JSP service method. Yeah. This underscore, it's for internal use. Okay? Yeah. It's the system level method. Yeah. So used by the server, yeah. Not for us, not for our Java programmers. Okay? The system level methods, internal. Yeah. We just want to understand these methods. Yeah. All right. The translate server still has the service method. Remember, each servlet should have the service method. Yeah, the translated, because it is a 100% servlet. It has the full structure of the original servlet. So there is no, compromise there. Okay, no compromise there. Yeah. So that's why. But the question is, what is the relationship between these two methods, right? What's the relationship? And we want to understand the relationship between these two methods. The JSP specific code, here there is a concept called a JSP specific code. Yeah. At this point, we only know one type of JSP specific code, scriptlets, right? Scriptlets. We learned from previous slide, the embedded Java code, that is the JSP specific code, right? Later we will learn there are several other types JSP specific code, okay? Type 1, 2, 3, 4. We will learn other types. Here we just use this general word, phrase, specific code. Okay. Yeah. All right. Scriptlets are copied. So now you know JSP, scriptlets, because it is one type of JSP specific code. So this type, it is copied into the body of the underscore JSP servlet method. Copy inside it. Why it is important? Why it is important? Why the scriptlet code is copied inside this method is important. It is important. So here I just give you some partial information. Later we will learn the concept. The concept is called scope concept. Later we will learn scope concept. You know the scope concept. In a program, there are many different scopes, right? Bigger scope, smaller scope, the variables behavior in different scopes, the behaviors will be different. So that's why we need to understand the scope well. Here, when you copy into this method, then the scope is the method scope, okay? Method scope. So that's important. Later, we will see the code. If it's outside this method, we call it class scope. Class scope and the method scope. These two concepts, very important for us to understand the behaviors. We will see many different behaviors. Why the behaviors like that? Okay? The rules, you can do this here, but you cannot do the same thing there. Because scope different, right? Scope different. So the rules also different. Yeah. Yeah, we will talk about scope concept later. Yeah. A lot of discussion about the scope concept. Yeah. Here, I just tell you, it is related. Yeah. It is important. All right. Next, the underscore JSP service method is called. Yeah, because eventually it will be called this method. Yeah. But not by us. All right. Not by we as Java programs. We never call this method. Yeah. This is a system level underscore. We know it's a system level method. So we should not call them directly. Okay. Yeah. But the system will call it. The server will call it. The server will call it through the service. Inside the service method, it will call it. So now you know the relationship between these two methods. So the service method is outside, okay? Outside. Yeah. Inside it, there is this underscore JSP service method. Okay? Yeah. Right? Yeah. Things like this, okay? It's nested structure. The structure is nested. So not in parallel, okay? Not in parallel, nested, one inside the other. Yeah. So this kind of structure, we need to understand so that we can understand many different complicated behaviors. Yeah. Later, yeah, in our advanced part. We need this background. Yeah. All right. Yeah. Now, next, the container passes the request response implicit object. Here, another concept. Okay. So request response implicit. Here you can see the font. Request the font, response font. When I use this font, that means we expect using the same spelling in our code. So that's not a regular word. So that's the word we need to use them in our programs. The spelling. Okay. Request response. They are implicit objects to this method. So this implicit object is another big concept inside JSP, implicit objects. From the name, you know, they are implicit. They are not explicit. Usually, the objects we use are explicit objects. But inside JSP, there are implicit objects. Okay? The server will create those implicit objects. We never need to create those objects by ourselves. If we create objects, that they are the explicit objects. Implicit objects, hidden way. The server uses some hidden way to create. Okay? Make them available for us. For us, we don't need to do anything. We just grab them and use them directly. So that's the typical way we use implicit objects. Okay, all right. In our first JSP example, so I will show you soon in my demo, we already use implicit objects. So we will see. At that time, I will explain this concept another time. All right, next.